online? Anyone? Anyone see me? Speakers chat. Hold on, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Can someone let me know they see my deck? Anyone? Anyone? Yes, great. Thank you so much. Awesome. I just needed one person to tell me that they can see the deck. Thank you. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? So this is going to be like a high level. Thank you. This is going to be a bit of a high level kind of overview of our of how to kind of some of the key things to look out for to establish a GRC program. And it's going to kind of hit some of the highlights inside your organization. It's a lot of content. We only have 1 hour, so I'm going to talk fast, but I really want to make this interactive. So if you have questions, make sure to go ahead and stop me. So I'm going to say, how do I go to the next page on this? 1 second. Whoops. Oh my goodness. There we go. All right. So these are some of the competency areas that we're going to go through, right? And like I said, it's a lot of information and it usually covers an entire company. So we'll go ahead and just kind of go through each of these areas. So the first one, the most important one, is always documentation management. A lot of people forget about this. It is not about that binder up on top of the bookshelf collecting dust, right? It is really the core thing you need to start with when you're establishing a GRC program. It has to have its own care and feeding. It has to have its own nurturing, and it has to have its own focus. You can't have it be an afterthought. You have to have a librarian. You have to have a structure to how you actually name your documents. You have to have controls on how you're managing the documents, right? They have a life cycle. They have authors. They expire. They have to have review sessions, right? So you want to make sure that your published documents are really, really kind of a core piece to your operations inside your company. Very, very important. I'm not going to read through all of this, but a lot of our failures when we go into companies is because we wing it, right? We don't know what is really expected of us because we aren't given any instructions on how to do things. So your policies really need to be reflective of your the expectations that roles may have and how to be successful at those positions that we're going in there, right? And of course, the last bullet here is pretty important. You want to make sure that security perimeter controls are always defined in your document stack and they're kept up to date. So basically, your document stack always consists of these 3 pieces. So my company works with ServiceNow. We're a ServiceNow partner. We stand up the GRC components of ServiceNow. And so I kind of use that basic construct when we kind of in designing this slide, right? And so you kind of want to go from the middle and read up and out, right? So the middle part is that published document that we were talking about. So your published document can be your policy, your process, your template, your work instruction, your knowledge base, your, whatever you want to call it in your company that gives that instruction and provides that governance and establishes those controls inside your own company. Remember, they're influenced by those authority documents. So those authority documents are your regulations and your frameworks that you have to abide by. But remember, when auditors come in the door, they never say, show me what NIST says. We know what that says. They never say, well, show me what HIPAA says. Show me what Sarbanes-Oxley says. We know what those say. We know what they say all day long, right? Well, what they say is, show me what your policies say. So that's really, really important for for us to acknowledge, sure, I have to abide by these regulations and these frameworks. That's great. But the auditors know what that says. How do they apply to me and what's applicable to me and my company, right? And then the next thing you want to do is, we're going to cover this in the next section, is the risk piece. So the risk piece is basically your internal documents and the control objectives in those documents. Remember, now you're going to gauge them and you're going to say, how much do I care that this fails or doesn't happen? Like, do I care a lot? Do I not care? We're going to cover that in a next section. All right. So, when you're doing this association of those influences, right? Those authority documents, those are your regulations and frameworks. We use a thing called N to the fourth. So it's now, next, near, never. So now you want to look at those influences and you want to say, do we do this now? Because those are your quick wins. Document them. You already have your control objectives. Collect your evidence. Get that virtual audit binder ready. That's one of your document items. Start stacking your evidence. Don't run around like a chicken without a head, gathering all of this stuff right before the auditors show up. There's no need to do that, right? Just go and start stacking it. Stack it every 2 weeks, once a month. Get into the habit of doing that, right? Then identify some of the ones you want to do next, right? That's the next one down the list. The next, create a project plan. Say, hey, I need a budget. I need support. I need funding. I need a person. I need a project manager. I want to take this next bundle of targets from my authority documents, those regulations and frameworks, and I want to get to over here in the next year. This is the stuff I do now. We are already gathering evidence for this. This is my stuff for the next year. And then what's happening next? My 3-year goals. This is my North Star alignment, right? This is the stuff that I'm going to get to in 3 years. This is my longer term roadmap. Now, the last one's never. And let me give you the example of that, because it's a real thing. Some people try to look at these authority documents and they're like, we have to make sure that every single one of these we adopt. You actually don't, not even if it's a regulation. So here's what's important. We're going to use Amgen as an example. Amgen, major biotech company. They make drugs, global, right? Heavily regulated. They have to abide by FDA. Anything that goes in your mouth, regulated by the FDA. Okay, great. So here we have CFR 21 CFR 135, which says, it's an FDA guideline that says, if you make goat milk ice cream, you have to use goat milk. It's in a regulation, but because we're standing this up at Amgen, we don't make goat milk ice cream. This doesn't apply to us. Regulation. So as you go through those authority documents, you need to make sure to say, there's some of them that are not going to even apply to us. And that's okay. You have to identify those and not spend the time on them. Don't spend the cycles. Just exclude them. Get them in front of your executives and say, you know what? These are excluded and here's why. We don't make goat milk ice cream. Let's not spend the time for them. Write that exclusion document, get that exclusion document in front of your auditor. They'll say, yeah, this makes sense. And you move on to the stuff that really, really does apply to you and your company. All right, next slide. Now, the stuff that you need to adhere to, right, are those control objectives inside your own published documents. So we talked from the top, right? The top is the authority documents. What influences you? Your inside is your published documents, those control objectives. So let's take an example. Let's say we're a bank. We have a few different authority documents. We're a national bank. What are our authority documents? Our authority documents are, let's say, Sarbanes-Oxley, we're publicly traded, GLBA for financial institutions, FFIEC, NIST, and ITO. let's say for support services, we have 5 authority documents, regulations, and frameworks, right? Each one of them says you need to do change management. Okay, great. Well, one bank can say, well, we do change management on Tuesdays at 2:30. That's a control. And we have to have 2 VP signatures before we release something into production. That's a control. And before we close out a change record, we have to have a post-implementation review. That's a control. A different bank has the same exact 5 authority documents, can have inside their change management policy, it'll say, we do cabs on Thursdays every other week. That's a different control. Same requirement, right? We have a cab. So it's satisfying all of those authority document requirements up there, but it's a different timing that's specific to that company. Next requirement. We don't have VP signature requirements, but we have to have 5 people approve the change out of our board of 10. That's a different control. That's different from the 2 VP signatures. And they don't have a requirement to do a post-implementation review, but this company has a requirement to do a rollback plan before they release. So that tangible set of instructions, that very specific set of control objectives, that's the stuff you're collecting evidence for. That's the stuff that's actually needing to be very well defined. And that's what you need to be adhering to as you're actually creating your published documents. That's the stuff the auditor's going to ask about, right? And so then you align that to your risk framework. We'll talk about that in another section. You're going to scope that to all of the applicable areas in your environment. And then you're going to be gathering that evidence longer term. Okay, great. All right, let's move on. So some of the key areas for your documentation, right? Make sure your templates are consistent across your company. Really, really important. Because I've been to a lot of companies where different companies are using different templates all the way across the board. And it's just a wrecked mess, right? And it's inconsistent. And that's one of the first things that auditors look for. So it gets a little messy. So make sure that templates exist. The footers are even important, page 1 of whatever, or just page. Make sure that that's consistently available to everyone, that you've pushed that out to everyone, that's reviewed and approved. Make sure if a change happens to a template, how does that happen? Who approves that? If an exception happens to a published policy, where does that go? If someone wants to make a recommendation to a published policy, how does that feedback come in? If you're the only one looking at a policy, you might make a mistake, or another person providing feedback might make a mistake. Go ahead and create some sort of a group review session, right? There's publication cycles. Who's got to review this, right? Connect that authority document, remember, in your published document. So make sure you go up to the top and you say, well, okay, I'm adhering to, my GOBA, my FFIEC, my Sarbanes-Oxley, my NIST, and my ITIL. List down the pieces that you're adhering to in that published document. Because your one document is going to adhere to a whole bunch of requirements in those authority documents. List them out. Because then then as you're updating your one document, you're satisfying all of those requirements, and it's fantastic, right? So remember the 4 N's, right? The N to the 4th, that's what we call it at IRM. And make sure that there's an owner for every competency area, and we're going to get into that as well in a little bit. So some questions you may want to ask yourself, and actually I'm going to pull up a different, I'm going to pull up a different slide for that. Sorry. And some of the slides we have, some of the questions. I couldn't get the polls in here, folks, sorry. So maybe I'll add the notes later on this one. We'll just go ahead and keep going. We're only on the first section. I've only got 39 minutes left. All right, let's talk about risk management real quick. So a lot of risk management feels like this target here with these arrows, right? So I can see where automation with deadlines, reports on edits, version control is helpful. Yes, that's absolutely true. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about risk. So risk is one of those things where it depends on who you talk to, unfortunately, right? So there's one school of thought that says you should just include 10 risks and call it a day. I don't know that that's really helpful, right? Especially with the SEC requirements that are coming out. Especially with larger companies who have a lot of controls to keep track of, when the controls fail, you need to know how important that failure is, or when they don't happen or they happen part of the way. Because if you are looking at a list of 3,000 items that aren't going well, how do you know which one to really focus in on? It's kind of you kind of need some way to gauge the weighting of that risk, right? The weighting of that control that hasn't happened. So basically, so FFIEC is an example used with GLBA, right? In financial sector, eons ago introduced this concept of risk weighting, which is very useful because you can actually associate that risk weight to the actual control objective. So now when that control objective fails, you can say, oh, you know what? We didn't have a cab and it's Tuesday. Let's not shut down the company over it. Might just be because we didn't have any changes to review this week. It's okay. Versus, oh, we didn't have 2 VP signatures on this general ledger related change that went out into production and took down finance. Yeah, big deal. Risk is high. Right now, let's drop everything and take a look at what happened there, right? So your risk becomes very different for each one of those control objectives. So what we want to look at here are some of the types of frameworks, right? So there's 2 different types of NIST frameworks that are very commonly used, right? So one is called the NIST Risk Management Framework. The red circle there really comes back down to NIST CSF, right? The very tried and true NIST CSF framework. For any of you that know that, kind of is broken down that process into a few very core steps. So this basically says that your outcome for that task needs to match that requirement in the CSF. That's what that risk management item says. Another one is basically saying, here's a list of controls. Here's your table of contests, right? So that's the controls that you want to reflect in your policy statements, in your published documents, policies, processes, standards, work instructions, whatever those look like, those published documents, right? And here's how you do that assessment against them. And this framework basically says, here's how you prep for that. That's the yellow part. Here's the assessment itself. That's the green part. And then here's what you do after the assessment. Because any of us that have been involved in any sort of an audit cycle, there's always a pre, a during, and a post audit review, right? This one right here is a really great graph. It was actually published in January, 98-page report. Just a fantastic graph. It actually a world representation, and actually even the lines, depending on how fat the lines are, actually you can gauge the correlation between the two. I kind of went and listed out just some of the biggest circles, right? And so the publicly available, downloadable, it's a great read. If you have trouble falling asleep, but a really great way to connect. And so, I mean, you can take something like this and as a starting point and say, okay, well, I want to be cognizant of not just the risks inside the controls that I've decided, but some of the global and larger risks that we may have that influence our company. Maybe use that as a reference point, right? ISACA. So I've been part of ISACA for way more years than I'd like to even talk through. And so they kind of have a little bit of a twist on IT, right? So they're saying, okay, well, let's look at, what IT does for it. What's the benefit of IT? How do we deliver IT? How do we plan for IT for the project, and then how do we protect IT, and then we're going to kind of take these risks and overlay IT, right? And so that's kind of their approach with their latest framework, and this one is a little on the older side. And again, a lot of different sources for risk frameworks, right? So that arrow up along the top, this used to be a cube many years ago, over 20 years ago, at WAMU in 02. I think this used to be a cube, the COSO cube, right? Now it's this beautiful arrow. And then, of course, ISO has a certification. A lot of us have worked with CIS as well, right? So take these as guidance, right? These are recommendations. These are intentionally written to be nebulous and vague. They're intentionally written to be applicable across different size companies and different maturities and different industries. And they're made to be as just bumper guards for you to say, okay, well, I can learn from some of these recommendations in these frameworks, and then I can take that and say, here's what's important to me, here's how this applies to me, here's how I can change this for my own specific controls and published documents. And so that's what you want to make sure that you do with these risk frameworks. So again, let's go back to that chart again, right? So we've got the authority document, we've got our published documents, and what have we done? We have that double-sided arrow for that risk framework that says, okay, here's my statement, and I'm going to connect it up to that control objective and say, here's the significance of how important that control is to me. I care a lot that it fails, or I don't care too much that it fails, so that downstream, as I look at all of my risks, I can say, hey, I'm focusing on the right things. Because when we have that 4 business day requirement with the Securities Exchange Commission, and those incidents are coming in, how do you know you're focused in on the right things unless you've designated the risk significance to those controls? All right. So kind of a recap for risk. Put it in your documents, right? Your published documents that already say, here's my control objective. I have a CAB once a week. How risky is it? Not that important if we don't have it, especially if we don't have changes, or it's very important. It's very, very important to us. And so we should drop everything in the world if we don't have a CAB once a week. Designated at that level. So then your documents need to not have guesswork in them. Your documents need to be really specific so that you're not running around and just everybody's guessing what the hell they're doing. They need to be very specific and clear. Super simple. Take out the guesswork. And then again, you're tracking to who owns that risk, who's tracking that risk down, how it's associated to which competency area. And then of course you want to establish that life cycle, right? You want to make sure that you're tracking your risks. You have a risk register. You're making sure that there's a life cycle, and you're actually, thinking carefully about how you're going to mitigate that risk from happening again in the future. Maybe you're going to go back to those documents. Maybe you're going to go back to the process owner. Maybe you're going to go to the governing or the steering committee and say, well, you know what, you guys, this is not working well, So let's keep going. I hope there are no questions. Can someone chat with any questions? No, we're good. All right, let's keep going. So vendor management, super hot topic. Super hot topic. Usually there's an animation on this screen, but I'm going to talk through it. So what we want to do is we want to look from the left and going out to the right. So the big building is your company. The gray cones are not cones, but cylinders is your data. Some of your data may be at a vendor's. Your vendor may have sent some of your data to their vendors. For all we know, that vendor may have sent some of your data to their vendors. This slide is supposed to build in that way. There's no animation on this. So let's talk through this, because according to all regulations, you are accountable for your data. Really, really important. Like, let that sink in. You are accountable for your data regardless of where you sent it. If you have 10 vendors that you scatter your data against, you're responsible for your data across those 10 vendors. Now, have you asked those 10 vendors what they're doing with your data, whether they send it to somebody else? Have you asked them for insurance? Have you asked them how long it takes them to notify you if they've lost your data? Have you asked them if they send it to somebody else, or if they're backing it up maybe somewhere else, at some other location, at some other vendor, right? Have you asked them what kind of controls they have on your data at another location? Have you asked them that at all? Like, what kind of vendor assessment or kind of vendor program do you have in place to ask all of these questions, right? One of the, I'm not even going to go into all of the examples of the leaks that there have been. I mean, like Marriott was leaking for 2.5 years before anybody even found out that they were leaking. They lost 500 million passports, guys. Very, very concerning, because 500 million passports, oops, lost. The data was at a vendor's vendor, and the controls downstream are not as stringent. All of the controls, logical access controls, physical access controls, the backups, the purging, the disposition, meaning how often are you disposing of my data? Are you asking the vendors that? So this is really, really important to take away from this session. If nothing else, go to your companies and ask those questions. I am more than happy to openly share with anyone here with the questionnaire that we use for doing the vendor assessments for your companies. Just, hey, ask. Our data hoarding issue is so bad right now. We are storing so much data, but we use it. We try to put algorithms against it. We're a consumerism sort of driven environment, and we want to push, as many purchases as possible, right? So we're hoarding all of this data. I'm going to give you a quick example. My dad passed over 10 years ago, 10 years and 4 months ago. 5 years before he passed, he went to a medical center over here in Simi Valley. I'm out of Thousand Oaks, California, Southern California. And a few weeks ago, I received a letter from that medical center addressed to him saying, oh, you should go get this credit report because we lost your data. 15 years later, why do you still have his information? So let's talk about data hoarding. Let's talk about how that's completely unnecessary to not have that data classification policy. Again, number one point in establishing a GRC program, have that policy that says, here's our data classification that tells us how quickly we purge data, and stick to that, even if it's at a vendor's. Find out how long those vendors are keeping your data and in what condition they're keeping your data. All right. This is a very long soapbox. I can keep going on, but I'm not gonna. We gotta keep moving on. We got 24 minutes left. All right. Good time to do this is when you're first engaging with that vendor. Second great time to do this when you're re-upping with that vendor. You have a contract that's due. Call your legal department. Hey, can I see the contract? Wait, give me a warning. Give me a half a year warning. Another great time to do that is when the vendor's not meeting their SLA. They promised you to do something and they're not doing it. You know, definitely make sure that you know what the breach notifications are. Breach notification, breach notification, breach notification contracts. I've seen so many contracts that say breach notifications, 6 months. Not kidding. We're going to notify you if we lost your data in 6 months. Not when it happens, not in 72 hours, in 6 months. Read the contract. And if you don't like it, ask to amend it. Do a vendor assessment as part of the amendment, as part of the change to that contract. You're allowed to ask for that. It is your data that you're accountable for. When the feds walk in, they're not going to accept the fact that you say, oh, it's in the contract. Those are the bad guys. I don't know what happens with my data. No longer an acceptable answer. It's your data, even if you gave it to the other guys. Be accountable for it. You can really do it a vendor assessment whenever you want to. Send an email that says, you know what, we just implemented a brand new vendor assessment process. Here's our questionnaire. Please fill it out and go from there. And guess what you're doing? You have a vendor management policy. That's part of number one, that document, right? You're standing up that document program. You have a vendor assessment program, and now you have those control objectives, and now you have risks gauging those, each one of those control objectives that say, if somebody comes back and says to me, I have a 6-month notification process, correct, unacceptable. Now that's a risk register item, and you create your mitigation plans from there. All right, guys, let's keep going. A word about SOC 2s. Warning, 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 warning. Please don't assume that because somebody says, oh, here's a SOC 2, it covers vendors. Most SOC 2s are excluding subservice organizations. I'm going to say it again. Most SOC 2s exclude subservice organizations. SOC 2s are written with the assumption that you have a vendor management program in place and that you are handling your vendors and that you know where your data is at your vendors, and that you know if that vendor is sending your data to another vendor and how they're handling it, how they're disposing of it, the whole spiel. Too many conversations that I cannot stress enough. I met a client and they say, well, we got a SOC 2 from the vendor. We're good. And I just pull up that vendor right in front of you and I do a control F for the word subservice, and right across the top, first word that comes up, subservice organizations are excluded from this SOC 2. Check it. Just check it, just to make sure that you know what your scope is for that SOC 2. All right. Ongoing vendor management. Manage that vendor. Make sure you know what they're responsible for. Measure their success. That's why that little measuring tape is on there. If you choose to leave your vendor, of course, do your parallel, kind of a parallel service. Make sure that parallel vendor is already in place and ready to receive and provide the service that you're sunsetting from the vendor that you're letting go of. And make sure to get your data. There's usually a window that you're allowed to get that data. Or ask for a receipt if you don't need that data. Ask for a piece of paper that says, here's how we disposed of your data. And that's an admissible, in a court of law, piece of paper. Ask for that. That's your currency. Consider it money. Consider it like it's actual money. I need my money back. Or you give me a piece of paper that says you burned my money the right way and that nobody else can use it. It's very, very important. All right. Governance with vendor management, understand your limitations and understand the expectations. These are the three most important things in this slide deck. I'm going to go through the rest of the stuff rather fast. Documentation, risk management, and vendors. The rest of it is going to kind of be a lot faster. All right. End users. Every single authority document out there is going to say to you, do you have an end user security awareness program? Technology moves fast. Make sure that you're updating those very, very quickly. Make sure you have statements that say never connect to a public Wi-Fi if you can at all avoid it. Hotspots on your phones are definitely preferred. Make sure that the guidance for your end users includes approvable, acceptable ways to connect into the network. And a lot of times mistakes happen by end users because we just haven't given them guidance. That's it. We expect people to know intuitively and telepathically safe ways to use their computers. They don't. And we need to be accountable for giving them that guidance. So again, back to number one, let's provide that documentation to them, right? Create that program, make sure it's active and ongoing. Most people really do want to come into the office and do it correctly. Most people really do not want to lose their laptop at the airport, and they really do want to do the right thing and be safe with the data and not click on bad links. But they just, if we haven't invested in making them aware of this stuff, then bad on us, right? Instead of bad on them and us blaming them for that. Asset management. So look, it's a big deal. I mean, look, this in itself is a whole competency, and somebody can spend an entire career in asset management, right? There's a bunch of different platforms, bunch of different methodologies, a bunch of different practices and logging and, updating and patching and configuration items and all kinds of things. So I'm not going to do this justice, but really, again, one, keep that published document in place that says, I'm going to keep my asset list current. Definitely give guidance to those end users and decide on whether you're okay with bring your own device. It's a very difficult situation because you may want to put MDM on devices. And in that case, people may lose personal things on their work issued device, or there's a fine line to some things, right? So you want to make sure that you're very, very clear in disclosing what gets monitored to your end users versus what doesn't. What kind of equipment is permissible. Of course, one of the newer things is ESG, right? Environmental social governance. So some companies are saying, we want to give you the least power as possible because we're trying to save electricity. Correct. So you want to manage to that life cycle. So there's a lot of considerations. As far as GRC goes, you want to make sure that you're tracking and you have the guidance available in those published documents as part of your governance program, a centralized area to keep your assets, and whatever is important to you and you're wanting to track. Again, your patches are important, right? Your here's a scan of how we're doing open ports. These are all really, really important security and non-security things, association to end users, right? These are, what data pieces are at the vendors? Where's my servers? Where's my storage? Keeping that rudimentary list in place is very, very important for establishing governance, right? Keep it updated, asset tracking, associated to that incident when possible. That incident is going to help you down the line, because if you have an incident, if you have a user that continues to have incidents up against an asset, might be a default asset, right? Maybe you had a batch of laptops that are just all bad and you want to send it back. They're all under warranty. Don't spend the money on getting new assets. You could also have a great batch of assets, but a very faulty user, right? So the incident association, the ticketing will really give you that intelligence, and align it to your risk competency. And here's incident management, right? So your incident management is kind of the center, the hub of all of your information. You want to make sure that your incidents are separated into two buckets. The first one is something is broken. Very, very important. It's very different from I need something. Unfortunately, a lot of times this is all on one ticketing system. So something is broken, it's supposed to be working and it's not. I need it working now. And I need something and something is happening in 2 weeks. I'm hiring somebody and they need access. Something is changing down the line. Nothing is broken. I need something later. So, unfortunately, ticket counts are very difficult when these two ticket types are not separated. And so I would definitely encourage having that active conversation inside your companies that say, hey, how do we separate these? Because it's a very different type of activity to support these two different types of tickets. Again, this is a center for incidents, right? So incidents are, they're going to be housed in one place. It's broken versus I need something, incidents versus requests, right? But again, but incidents need to be connected with all of the other competency areas, right? Two or more incidents becomes a problem. You need to do root cause analysis. Incidents can generate changes. Incidents should reflect assets. You can have vulnerabilities, create incidents. So everything the truth needs to be inside that incident ticket. And I can go down the line, right? You can have an end user open up a risk ticket. That's an incident, right? And you can associate it that way, because what if somebody tailgated them and they don't know what to do, or somebody looks funny in the lobby? You want to allow them to open up those kinds of tickets, right? This is one of the first areas that an auditor will ask about from a GRC perspective. How are you handling your incidents? That needs to be a cybersecurity conversation. How are you having your systems talk to each other and create incidents, right? Those are integration conversations. So that's very important to have that auditable trail in that life cycle in that incident. Problem management. So mentioned this briefly before, right? Two incidents equals a problem. This is where usually it's an after the fact, right? Usually that root cause analysis I've been in root cause analysis in the pharma space that continued 1.5 years after the event, right? So you can have full project plans that last for a very long time until you get to the root cause, and many root causes will actually include mitigation efforts. Auditors love seeing you identify your own issues and put in mitigation efforts. That's their favorite thing to look through, right? Because then they're going to say, hey, these are the things that you've identified yourself, and now you're actually fixing your own problems, and they love that stuff. So might include some risk acceptances, some workarounds, kind of its own competency as well. Risk, problem management, great to mature too, right? A wonderful opportunity to kind of to get to this. Be open-minded for your problem management. I do want to say invite as many people as you can to participate, because if you keep looking at your problem with the same people that are involved with the problem over and over and over, you might not get past figuring out why the problem keeps happening, because you're looking at the same problem with the same lens over and over again. Try to go into the lines of business. And I mean, I think this is why we're even talking about having women involved, right, in our industry, is because, you want to look at the same problems differently. And that just includes expanding your audience and participation out to areas that you might not think really apply to the problem you're trying to deal with, but ask, because it may prove some value. Just a quick hint to that one. Change management. So look, change management is kind of like incident is your central logger for everything. Change is the thing that touches production. Really depends on where you are, what kind of an industry you are. So one of the pharmas I was with, we had dev, test, QA, staging, and production. Staging and production were equal. So that means that before you hit stage, you had the same exact controls that you did for production. And if it worked in staging for X amount of time, it pushed to production, right? So now, and different companies are going to have different types of environments. So an important thing to do is scope that document, to scope your change management document to say, this is only scoped for production, because people forget to do that. And all of a sudden they've included their entire dev and their test environment in their audit scope. So make sure you scope that down to production, which means that all of your assets, the assets that are working in dev, in QA, they're not part of change management. You don't have to open up a change record for those. Don't do it. Don't waste the time, right? You need your review and your approvals to touch your production environment. So make sure you've scoped that down appropriately. Next one is, I strongly recommend never allowing anything into production without a rollback plan and the right amount of approvals through a CAB. I also recommend expanding out your post-implementation review requirement on change management, because everybody forgets the website update, the training update, the collateral update, the communication email that needs to go out to let the end users know something's happened. The post-implementation review task needs to include all of those things, instead of people walking in the morning and all of a sudden something in their UI changed because of a change that you pushed through and they don't know what the hell to do. It's better to communicate that forward and make sure that that happens regularly, and you force, because a lot of the folks in technology will not think about that. They won't think about changing the pamphlet or updating the training material or updating the website or those softer UI things and the engagement things. They won't be thinking about that. So make sure that you're updating that appropriately. All right, HR. This looks like a really, really simple graph, and it actually really is if you do it the right way. Your roles, your logical and your physical access must be aligned to roles. I'm going to say it again. It should not be aligned to a person, not Susie, not Bob, not Phil. It needs to be assigned to a role. So when I hire a financial business analyst, it doesn't matter if I hire a Susie or a Bob or a Steve or a Jamie. The permissions that come with that role must be the same. The access that they're granted to for the systems must be the same, and it must be the same systems. So what happens is people grant permission based on duplication of humans. And I have seen that gone bad so many times. I'll tell stories about it. the way to break that chain is to create a matrix that says, here's my role. This is where HR comes in. They have job families. Here's my role, and here's the systems and the level of permission for that system that I can map to that role. It's an exercise. Please do it. Please do it, because I had so one company I remember had 5,000 people who had access to this one platform, and they had 4,839 unique roles. No kidding. Absurd. How do you A, manage that? B, there's no central ledger. C, when someone leaves, you have no idea if they're the unique user for that particular function in the platform. Then things start breaking and you don't know why. So please try to take the time to do this. Very, very important. And suspensions for LOA. It's another big topic as well. People on salary are logging in to email when they're collecting disability and then coming back and saying, you need to pay me for back pay because I was signing on to email every day. And so work with your HR to determine whether or not access suspension is needed, because people are getting funny about that. All right. Legal department. Legal's critical. Again, those signatures, vendor management, huge, right? Make sure your vendors are doing QBRs and check to see whether or not the contracts are in there. Call your legal department, make friends with them, say hello. Just say, hey, how can I help you? Can you please let me know when these contracts are up? Give me a half a year heads up. They many times will have software for that. Just send me a heads up. Read the contract. Have them help you read the contract. Find out what some of the key salient points are, especially if you're in healthcare. You need to look out for BAAs, and you need to find out whether or not there are other important areas. One thing I'm going to say about legal is I've unfortunately been in many situations where there were auto re-ups in contracts that nobody knew about. At the end of a 3-year engagement, 3-year contract, all of a sudden, the C-level that brought me in got hit with a $400,000 plus withdrawal from his budget because some other boss over 3 years ago signed a contract that said that there was going to be an auto payment 36 months from now for whatever the sum was. And surprise, surprise, everybody had to scramble. So if you're in a position where you can check that and get in front of it, please do. Finance, same kind of thing, right? Discipline bookkeeping is the one thing I'm going to talk about there. And again, allocations for all of your assets is very important, and license true up is very important. And again, that kind of swims in that asset space as well. Project your staffing if you can, because everything is going to work downstream from that as well. Your asset allocations, all of that. And establish your own GRC areas that I might have not covered here. There's probably something in your organization that's important. And here's our contact information. If you want to have any of the referential information from the slide, as far as some of the risk frameworks and some of the graphs that I displayed, I'm more than happy to. And I actually think that this is actually inside this session is this presentation deck. And I think I finished just in time. I think I've got 30 seconds left. And if someone wants to ask something real quick, then please do. And thank you for all of the interactivity from everybody and all of the comments during the session. That was really great to hear that all of you were actually listening. And actually, I'm going to be at a booth opening up right now. So please join if you have any questions at the booth coming up. Thanks.